Hello, my name is David Chatelain from the BJ Ball Group. Today I'm here with Phil Lawrence, an industry leader in the field, particularly of the subject we're going to talk about today, which is the carbon tax. Phil, if I could probably throw to you, I've known you for over 20 years. You were a printer by trade, so you have certainly an attachment and affiliation with this industry. Can you probably just give us a bit of a background?
Yeah, thanks, David. You're right, I was a printer at one stage there, but my history in the industry goes back more than 35 years, covering pretty well every part of the industry. But over the last 15 years or so, been mostly involved in the paper sector, the forestry, pulp and paper industry, not only Australia but around the world. And a big part of that now has shifted me into an academic career. So I've shifted from the industry, if you like, into academia and some consulting.
And I think one of the purposes of today is not to have a political agenda or to what side of the fence you lie, or to actually talk about the environmental aspect of the issue. It's more to say that this issue looks certain to pass both houses of government. It looks certain to become law. So Phil, what does that actually mean for us as individuals and us as a business?
Well, if I were to put a political hat on, I would say it creates an exciting time for Australians, as individuals and businesses moving forward. That would be the political answer. How we get there, I'm not quite sure. Really what it does mean is that if you look at the Australian, the argument behind the policy is that the Australian government firstly want to address carbon. And so if they address carbon, it will make Australia a cleaner society moving forward.
Is this where the tax comes into it?
Yeah, the fundamental idea of the tax, which plays out in the third level of the policy, which is how do we make, the government wants to drive industry to become more efficient by investing in the appropriate technologies. And so the idea of the tax, once again, as I said, it's not a single tax as a concept. It's 82 parts of the 82 separate bills, I think it's 82 or 81 separate bills. But the idea of that is to make our country invest in technologies that's going to make the country more efficient. By making the country more efficient, we emit less carbon and we use less carbon-based fuels.
Coming back to BJ Ball, where we've done a life cycle analysis, how does it impact on us and our clients?
Well, I imagine the life cycle analysis that BJ Ball would have done would have shown that, in fact, a company like this would be a fairly small emitter of carbon, because you haven't got out in your warehouses here big equipment that's sort of burning coal and oil and all that. So. And spitting out lots of fumes into the atmosphere. You are effectively what I would categorise as a low emitter. And for most of your customers, and your customer base would also probably fit into that category as well. I mean, sure, they've got printing machines and guillotines and pre-press technologies, but they have not shoveling coal and oil into it, and they're certainly not pumping out great big plumes of CO2. They are users of electricity, of course, and that will impact on your business. So for you, I think the impact is going to be rather indirect. You may, because of some of your suppliers, I mean, you do consume electricity with air conditioning and lighting and anything that consumes electricity is going to have some potential for increased costs. So you may see a component of your electricity costs going forward is going to be attributed to the carbon tax. But it may also mean that some of the companies that you can choose to buy your electricity from, rather than pass the tax on to you, they may in fact not pass the tax on because they put in new, efficient, low carbon technologies. For example, for an electricity producer in Australia, the perfect opportunity is for them to supplement their coal-fired power stations, with wind and solar. And on the coastline, we can use wave technology. There's an excellent an example on the south coast of an experiment with wave technology in terms of generating electricity. for your clients that exist in other parts of the country, like for example South Australia, there's geothermal, so we can actually draw energy from deep underneath the ground, and these technologies replace carbon or replace carbon-based fuels
and give
like
you a
coal.
lower base.
And give you a lower base. And so it's a matter of how those companies want to pass those costs on, or if they want to retain that, if you like, that benefit of becoming an efficient electricity producer and therefore not paying the tax and see that as the advantage. So the impact on your business, I think, will be fairly small.
So Phil, the top 500 companies are going to be legislated on the carbon policy. What happens to the rest of us?
Well, no one's going to be immune from the law, and we should make that quite clear. Even though the top 500 companies are going to be covered by legislation, they're the ones that initially are going to be impacted by a carbon tax, and then eventually they're going to fall into the carbon trading through a cap and trade system, which is going to work a lot more effectively, believe it or not, than a tax. The law is going to filter all the way down to the individual small businesses. I mean, the ACCC have been very, very clear in saying that companies who are going to pass the cost of carbon tax on better make damn sure that they really got that absolutely rock solid. So the first thing I would say, you're commenting on the 500 are covered by legislation. We are all covered by legislation, in so much as that we can't lie about the carbon tax. The 500 are going to be covered by initially the direct tax and then by cap and trade, but it's really important that the rest of the community, the rest of the printing industry, the smash repairers and the air conditioning companies and all the others make sure that they don't have furphy price increases that are basically, this is a direct result of the carbon tax. So the law will extend all the way down. But I get the drift of your question is more to do with the separation between those top 500 and all the others. And we should recognise that I think it's something like 98% of Australian businesses are less than 20 employees. So the SMEs and very small businesses make up the vast majority of companies in Australia, just as they do in Germany and the US and the UK and everywhere around the world. Small businesses are the core of society. Well, they're going to exist in what we call the voluntary market. And the voluntary market is basically, if you like, one that I call the market of rhetoric. That's the market where small companies can put their hand on their heart and say, we are doing everything we possibly can to make ourselves clean and green. But they're not covered by law. They do that voluntary. They don't have to. There's no requirement that they are green. There's no requirement that they reduce their emissions. If they don't reduce their emissions, they will be, if they have inefficient printing machines or they have, massively big air conditioners where they don't need them, they're going to face with increased electricity costs. And so their efficiency is going to be through costs, through just using too much electricity.
So Phil, are offsets the best option in the voluntary market?
That's a great question. And on the surface, it would seem that it would be. Simply a business becomes more efficient and then you simply pay somebody else a bunch of money and that makes your business green. But I think it would be true to say that a lot of academics, a lot of scholars who work in this area would argue that it's not. I mean, because the potential for sort of unintended consequences is too much. Really, I think most people would agree, the best opportunity for companies to do is to set themselves carbon targets, if you like, or emissions targets or energy targets. I mean, you've done, BJ Ball have done life cycle analysis, and in that you would have come up with, what your electricity costs in terms of your air conditioning, what your electricity costs in terms of your lighting, what your fuel costs are for your cars, what your fuel costs are for your delivery trucks. So you'd know all these things in terms of what your business is all about. And so I think most academics and scholars would agree, and policymakers would agree, that the best thing that companies can do is set targets. For example, I don't know how many cars in the BJ Ball fleet, Australia-wide this is, Australia and New Zealand. But it may be that you have a fuel bill of say 100,000 litres per month. Well, why not set a target to make that 80,000 litres per month? Why not set your air conditioning setting from 25 degrees in winter to 22 degrees in winter? It's still warm. 22 is still warm relative to a cold winter's day. Why not set your air conditioning to 25 in summer? How many times have we walked into a shop, and you've actually been freezing, wanting to get outside the shop, and this is in summer because the air conditioning has been set far too low. These are wastes that
can save us money.
And can save a lot of money. It's possible, for example, I dare say that if you went out to any one of your company cars in your parking lot and you measured the tyre pressure, you'd probably find that the tyre pressure has probably got a 90% chance of being too low. Well, every kilopascal, I think it's kilopascals, that your pressure is low, is going to increase the resistance, the rolling of your company cars. So by making sure your tyre pressures are higher, you reduce your fuel bill, and that reduces your costs. So it's possible, for example, in your next annual report to say, look, BJ Ball's got 350 company cars. I know you've got the latest Bentley.
Of course.
So, but I mean, you can say that you've got 350 cars, and you know that your fuel consumption is X, and next year our target is to do an increase in volume of sales, but we're going to do it with this much less petrol. And that's a possibility to do. And they're the sorts of targets that small companies, and I know BJ Ball's a large company, but on the world scale, relative to those 500 big polluters, you are a small company. They're the sorts of things that companies around the world can effectively do tomorrow morning and have an immediate impact.
Is it going to be a sort of government stamp, like a FSC or PFC on this type of on the voluntary side?
Oh, the government have, and governments around the world have tried that, and also voluntary, third parties have tried to have stamps and seals, and the gold seal for an offset, and and 5-star offsets. But what does that mean? Is a gold star in Australia equal to a gold star in New Zealand? Is a gold star in Japan equal to a 5-star in the US? I mean, the international trade is just not there in offsets, and very hard to communicate. But certainly the government have, in the past, have tried to legitimise the voluntary market by having standards set, for offsets. But I think at the end of the day, governments not only in Australia but around the world recognise that the voluntary market is massively difficult to police, massively difficult to control, unless you're in China or Russia, for example.
And open to interpretation.
Well, interpretation is another word for graft and corruption, yeah. Yes. Yeah. So, and it is. It's very, very difficult to manage.
So, Phil, smaller voluntary businesses would be better off to become more efficient rather than continuing to offset?
Absolutely. There's absolutely no question that the best path that a company can go on, small or large, but certainly small in the case of the vast majority of your customers, is to become more efficient. And not only become more efficient, but to become continually more efficient every year. And efficiency has a number of advantages. The first thing is that efficient businesses are more profitable. Efficiency is driven primarily by competition. If a company, say in a suburb in Sydney, a printing company, becomes more efficient, what happens is that its competitors in its area also become more efficient in order to keep up with them. It's called the Red Queen effect. Companies continually run to keep up with each other. Because if you don't become more efficient, basically your costs increase. As your costs increase, you just don't become more competitive. But what it does is it reduces your emissions, which is, as I said, the policy aim of the government is to drive industry to invest in technologies that are more efficient. But I should say, it's not just technologies that we should be looking at here. It's also training, in terms of investing in skills. How do you use your equipment better? How do you make sure your equipment's the latest technology? There are 4,500 printers in Australia, And the range of technologies goes down from the very, very basic, to the incredibly sophisticated. And it's those very sophisticated ones that are going to be the less polluting ones. So what we need to do is to see our industry move forward in terms of becoming more dynamic, more efficient, and every year setting targets. And so I'd be advocating to BJ Ball's customers and also BJ Ball is to not just look at, say, your core business as your efficiency opportunity. I mean, your core business is paper, obviously. To me, that would be crazy just to look at just making sure you buy the best papers from around the world and say, our warehouse is full of really good papers from around the world, but mind you, our warehouse is inefficient. You really need to focus on the parts of the business that complement your core business. In the case of a printing firm, for example, it could be that they've got the latest printing technologies, but how do they move paper in and out of their business? Do they get a delivery every day? Can they suffice with a delivery every couple of days? How do they deal with their waste? I mean, how far away is their paper supply to their printing machine? What's their maintenance cycle on their printing machines? Once again, as I said before, in terms of their offices, what's their air conditioning set at in summer and winter? Most companies set it at 25 all year round. Crazy, or somebody gets this feeling, gee, I'm too hot today, turn it down. Or you need to develop standards not only in print but also in the supplementary parts of the business. When you select company cars, make sure you select company cars that are going to be environmentally efficient and less polluting. When you select new equipment, a desktop printer, and even when you select a litho printer or a digital printer, new printing technologies, one of the first ports of call should be how much electricity does this printing machine consume? How much electricity does this new air conditioning unit consume? Can we structure our sales calls so that we use less fuel but to get the same volume of sales? There's all these things in terms of driving efficiency. Offsets don't play a part in that. And that's really...
Abjugating the course, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. What you're doing with offsets is you're passing the responsibility onto somebody else. And you're passing the obligation onto somebody else, and basically you're saying, we've done as much as we want to do, and now we'll simply just plant a tree.
And pay a
somebody.
high figure.
Yeah, pay, and sometimes pay. I sometimes pay what I think is a ridiculously high figure, but that's how the business of companies, how they want to spend their money. And the ones that don't set targets, the ones that aren't reducing their electricity consumption, the ones that aren't reducing their water consumption, the ones that are not concerned about that are going to be faced with increased costs over time. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, for example, in Australia, on average, that we see a doubling of electricity costs in the next couple of years, with 3-4 years. That's a big impost. So if you buy a printing machine today that's consuming 40% less electricity than a machine that was manufactured 4 years ago, 40%, that's a 40% reduction in your electricity costs. That's an efficiency mode. That's moving to more efficiency. And then not only that, if you can also work with your suppliers, as I said, in terms of delivery, in terms of the way the material is supplied to you, work with your customers, in the way that you see them, the way that you call on them. Once again, these are efficiency drivers.
These are all ways that we can reduce our costs.
Yeah, make our business more efficient.
That's obviously the trick for all of us in this environment. I mean, margins are at, I suppose, a very skinny level, and it's how we can take more costs out of the bottom end. And as you said, if we were able to do deliveries every second day or even daily, rather than 2 and 3 times a day, they're things, they're costs that can actually be given back to the market.
It's what economists call the carbon economy. The world has been through different incarnations of for value, if you like. We had gold, silver. Originally it was copper, of course. Back hundreds of years ago, and now we're moving to carbon as part of the cost of doing business effectively. Carbon. The more electricity you consume, the more a energy production site somewhere in Australia is emitting carbon into the atmosphere. The less electricity you consume here, the less electricity they have to produce, and therefore the less coal they have to burn. And that's what it's all about. Basically, reducing electricity. Reducing electricity somewhere else in Australia means burning less coal.
Well, thanks, Phil. I hope, viewers, that you found that to be informative and educational. It is a very hot topic at the moment, and I hope we put that more in perspective for you. Just like to thank you for watching this. We will be doing more of these in the future, so stay tuned for other topics as they come through. Thank you.